In-depth discussions of the harsh realities of war. On the Brink podcast with Philip Ingram.
So now that we know that Donald Trump is going to be the 47th President of the United States from January, what is the implications for NATO and for UK defence in particular? Well, if we look at NATO, if we look at when he was 45th President, what did he do? He threatened to withdraw from NATO. Even some of his closest military aides weren't certain that the United States would stay in NATO. But he threatened Article 5 of NATO's constitution, which is the attack on one is an attack on all, the very piece that underpins NATO from a military deterrence perspective. He threatened that by saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you don't pay, we don't play. So he was suggesting that the US may not come to the aid of NATO members if they're attacked, if they haven't paid their dues, that is 2% of their GDP into their defence budgets, which is what everyone has signed up to. And a large number of NATO nations hadn't done that. And what did they do when the threat came in? A large number of NATO nations got their expenditure up to 2%. There's still a few that haven't. So what are we likely to see with Donald Trump against NATO? I would see more pressure coming on those countries again, more pressure on US involvement in NATO, and him putting caveats on that again, saying the if you don't pay, we don't play game. We're already seeing reports of defence expenditure becoming something that is going to be at the top of his budget because he knows, or top of his priorities, because he knows that defence expenditure is good for the US economy. Because it's US companies that will benefit from that, and it'll be good for US exports because the US exports weapons around the world, the world's largest exporter, I think. So we will see an awful lot more rhetoric in that. Will he actually leave NATO? No, I don't think so. I think the alliance is too good for the Americans. It gives them too much influence into NATO.
Amongst the many issues that are occupying people in the wake of President Trump's re-election campaign and his inauguration in January next year, with what's going to happen in the Middle East. At the moment, there's an ongoing war. Israel's at war over a number of fronts, and any leverage or any power that America as a country has over Israel seems extremely limited. President Trump in the past has expressed support for Israel, but he's also expressed support for Iran becoming a successful, peaceful country, and in his first presidency, he also removed and denounced the carefully thought through and carefully wrought joint comprehensive plan of action put together by President Obama. So his record on this, as on so many issues, is somewhat mixed and somewhat ambiguous. The issue is now, what is he going to do? The first thing that needs to be said is there's still 75 odd days to run for President Biden's presidency. And in the past, and history is interesting here, when that period of transition has taken place, Israel has often been hammered more than most by the outgoing US president, frustrated perhaps by Israel's unwillingness to accede to their demands. So it is possible that some kind of pressure will come on Israel to bring at least part of the fighting in Israel and the Middle East to a close over the next month or so. But what President Trump will do beyond that is much more unclear. At the heart of what he's doing, and the heart of some of his statements and what his policy was an appeal to the American people, essentially around issues such as immigration, certainly, but also about their economy. We also have the words of the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, who is vehemently opposed to what he regards as American adventurism and overseas wars. And I think that is a sentiment that's strongly held by President Trump himself. So my estimate, it could only be an estimate at the moment, of what President Trump might decide to do, is as follows. Firstly, I think he will look to Biden to try and do what he can to resolve the issues before Trump takes power in January of next year. Secondly, he will continue to support Israel, so in a sense there'll be continuity with the current administration, but it will not be the kind of overwhelming support that Netanyahu expects and actually wants from there. But he'll be wary of getting involved in a major entanglement with Iran. And he may indeed then bring out his in his own words, his deal-making skills to try and achieve some kind of agreement with Iran. So if you're looking for continuity or change, bring it to that sort of summary point. My sense at the moment is there'll be more continuity with the present administration than change. Time will tell, and there's still a long way to go. But that's my current assessment of where President Trump is going to take things.
I've been saying from the beginning of this year that regardless of what happened in the US elections, that America was most likely lost as the reliable security partner that we have known in previous decades. Now, it is far too early to know exactly what Donald Trump will do, despite what he has said before the election and despite a number of leaks coming out of his transition team and other advisors close to the new US president. I think at the moment we need to see these for what they are, kite flying, and we need to take them with a fairly large pinch of salt. I have said that the election of Donald Trump could indeed have a silver lining for Ukraine, and that silver lining would be Europe's leaders finally realizing that they needed to stand up so Europe can stand on our own 2 feet. Now, there are some encouraging signs already. President Macron of France has only a few days ago talked about Europe being herbivores, while the axis of evil that we face, led by Russia and China, are carnivores. If we face carnivores as herbivores, we will lose. And in President Macron's word, we need to become at least omnivores, if not carnivores also. There are some promising signs in Germany also, where Friedrich Merz, the leader of the opposition, has been hugely critical of Olaf Scholz's approach to supporting Ukraine, and in particular his refusal to give Ukrainians the Taurus missiles which they need. Now, Olaf Scholz's government has just fallen and will face a election early in 2025. Meanwhile, if we go further east, we see that Poland is now committing to spending 5% of its GDP on defence, while the 3 small Baltic nations already spend 3% or more on defence, while the new NATO members of Sweden and Finland are both approaching 2.5%. So let's turn to Britain. The new Labour government has yet to commit to 2.5% on defence. Now, Britain has a very important leadership role to play in Europe when it comes to European security and supporting Ukraine. Sir Roland Walker, the head of the British Army, has recently said the British Army is not ready to fight, and if we're not ready to fight, we are not ready to deter. I think it is absolutely incumbent on us in the UK on this weekend, above all others, where we commemorate those millions of men and women who fought and many died for freedom, that we maintain that critical leadership role that we have played in Europe in support of Ukraine for the last 3 years.